Hi guys, my name's Sanjay Gupta. I'm a consultant cardiologist, and today I wanted to do a little video on the subject of anemia. And this was requested by a friend of mine called Monica Garrison. So Monica, this is for you. I'm sorry it's a little bit late, but I've been a little bit busy with my new puppy, Bluebell. Anyway, there's a few things I wanted to talk to you about today. The first thing to say is that when it comes to good health, I mean, a lot of people worry about their health and they're really worried that they may fall ill, they may die early. It all boils down to four things, okay? Health is all about four things, or bad health, okay? Number one, it's the aging process. The older you get, it's just something that happens. As you get older, there's more wear and tear, so you're more likely to fall ill. Number two, bad luck. You know, sometimes you could do everything right, you could be young, but it's just bad luck. Number three, genetics. So if you have inherited bad genetics, you can't really do anything about it. And sometimes that can be unfortunate and that can make you fall ill. And then the final thing is something you can do a lot about, and that's lifestyle. Therefore, I think a lot of people worry about the fact that they may fall ill, that they worry about their health. But remember, the only thing that you have in your control is your lifestyle. And as long as you try and maintain your lifestyle, then you're doing the best you can. Everything else is just down to your fate and your genetics and time. So that's just something I wanted to share with you because you know, I think it's unnecessary to worry excessively about how long you're going to live, etc. And I think it's more important to live in the moment and to try and work on your lifestyle and see where you can improve your lifestyle. The second thing I wanted to say to you was was on the subject of anemia. Now, anemia basically means that you do not have enough blood going around the body. Okay, now the whole body needs oxygen, and oxygen is transported in blood. Okay, and blood is composed of blood cells, and the quality and the quantity of blood cells matters, because if you're short on the quantity or if your quality of blood cell is poor, then you will not be able to transport enough oxygen around, and therefore you increase the requirements, i.e. the heart is a pump, it has to pump blood around. If it is not pumping good quality blood around, then it's going to have to work harder to try and get the oxygen round, because it's just going to have to pump the blood around more. And so when it comes to the blood, the number of blood cells you have is dependent on iron, and the quality of blood cells you have is dependent on vitamin B12 and your folate, okay, folic acid levels. And most people would say that you are anemic when your hemoglobin level, your blood count hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrying molecule, drops below a certain value. And that is dictated by, you know, people have done studies and they've decided that, for example, if you're a woman and your hemoglobin is below 11, then you would be considered anemic, okay? It is also, let's assume that your hemoglobin drops to 8. What will happen? You've got less blood going around, okay? Therefore, you've got less oxygen going around. So your vital organs, your brain, your kidneys, your liver, will all want more oxygen. And there is a natural response then to ask the heart to pump harder. Okay, and the heart will be pumping harder constantly, and so you can get a sinus, you will get a sinus tachycardia. So your heart is in a normal rhythm, it's just beating much faster, and that will therefore feel like constant palpitations, that your heart rate is constantly high. That does not mean that your heart beats irregularly or is in a funny rhythm, but it will still give you palpitations because your heart is going to be pounding. It'll be pounding regularly and it'll be pounding constantly. And if you exercise, i.e. you increase the demand on your heart, because you're increasing the demand, you're increasing the oxygen uptake in the muscles, then the heart will have to pound even harder. So anemia by itself is a common cause of palpitations, okay? But the palpitations are generally regular, and they're fast, and they're constant, and they get worse with exercise. Eventually what happens is that you get these palpitations, the heart keeps working harder and harder and harder, and with any structure, because the heart is a muscle, if you work a muscle harder and harder, the natural tendency is for the muscle to thicken up, and the heart muscle can thicken up, and therefore then, because it's become thicker, it itself needs more blood. And if there is not enough blood, then actually that extra bit of muscle starts becoming starved of oxygen, and therefore the heart will paradoxically start weakening. And that is called heart failure due to anemia. It's called high output heart failure because essentially the heart is just working so much harder all the time that it'll cause it to fail. So that's one mechanism by which you get palpitations in anemia. When you're looking at anemia, so the second thing to say is that anemia is defined by a value, a number, okay? And that number is decided by a bunch of people sitting in a room. That number does not necessarily mean, just because you are in that number doesn't necessarily mean that you're not potentially subclinically anemic, i.e. your number may still be there, but you may still be deficient of iron, or you may be deficient of B12, or you may be deficient of folate. So we do see people who, and I have seen this myself in my clinic, where their blood count is normal, so your immediate impression is that the patient is not anemic, but if you ask, or if you do the B12 level, or if you do the iron level, or the ferritin level, then you find that that is significantly reduced. So the patient is deficient of iron, but they haven't reached that stage where they've crossed that cutoff where they'd be defined as being anemic. However, because they're deficient of iron, they're already increasing, their heart is already having to work much harder to try and get the blood round. They just haven't gone, the anemia, dropping the number is a relatively late sign. So it is well worth, if you are getting constant, some people complain of constant tachycardia, constant pounding in the heart. It is worth just getting that checked out, going to the GP and saying, can you do my iron levels, and can you do my B12 levels, and can you do my folate levels? Okay. At a later stage, what tends to happen is if you're iron deficient, your blood cells start getting smaller in size. So you get something called hypochromic microcytic picture. And if you're B12 or folate deficient, then your blood cells actually start getting bigger. So your GP could have a look at the blood film and tell you, but remember, that's a late sign. You want your iron levels checked, you want your B12 levels checked, and your folate levels checked. It's important to bear in mind, you have to ask yourself, why do people get iron deficient? In women, mainly it's periods, menstruation, etc. Sometimes it can be inadequate diet, but generally uncommon. In older people, if you're iron deficient, then it is really, really important that you get referred to a gastroenterologist, because sometimes a cancer or something like that in the gut can cause silent bleeding, so the patient is slowly losing blood without realizing it. So if you are older, so say above the age of 50 odd, then you should definitely go and get checked out for iron deficiency. And if you're finding to have iron deficiency, you should definitely have an endoscopy and possibly a colonoscopy, where they look up into the back passage to make sure that there's nothing going on there. There is another anemia which is worth knowing about, and that is called the anemia of chronic disease. Now, it's very interesting because if you have chronic disease, say you have rheumatoid arthritis, okay, something that's there with you all the time, then what tends to happen is you are constantly inflamed, and that inflammation can manifest as anemia. So if you find a normocytic, i.e. the blood cells are normal in size, but you're anemic and there is a chronic condition, then that reflects continuous inflammation. And we know inflammation, constant inflammation over a long period of time, can certainly cause the heart to become more irritable, can certainly lead to the formation of ectopic beats. So in that setting, it's important to try and target that inflammation and settle that down. So if you've got active rheumatoid arthritis, treating that will improve the anemia and will get rid of the palpitations. If you've got, some other chronic disease, I don't know, something like chronic lung disease, constant inflammation will cause anemia of chronic disease. If you can treat it, then the ectopics, etc., will get less. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is proton pump inhibitors. Now, it's very interesting because you see, this is one of the big problems, and it goes to show how our lifestyle may have contributed to a lot of the problems we see. Because of the food we're eating, because of the kind of food we're eating, a lot of people now have reflux disease. Okay, so if I am in my clinic, I would say 8 out of 10 people I see are on proton pump inhibitors. That's Losec, lansoprazole, omeprazole, Nexium. These are all proton pump inhibitors. Okay, and what proton pump inhibitors do is they reduce the production of gastric acid. Okay, and so by doing so, they relieve our reflux. However, it is important to realize that the production of gastric acid is a natural thing. Our bodies were designed to produce gastric acid. And if you're going to inhibit gastric acid production chronically over a long period of time, then there must be some kind of compromise that you're making by doing that, because it's supposed to be a natural process. And actually what people have observed is that long-term proton pump inhibitor use can be associated with deficiency of iron absorption, because gastric acid helps absorb iron. Gastric acid also helps absorb B12 levels. And if you're constantly inhibiting your gastric acid, and then you can become iron and B12 deficient over a long period of time. And that may be another mechanism by which proton pump inhibitors could be causing palpitations. So these are the kind of palpitations which are just fast and regular, and they're just constantly there, and they get worse when you exercise. And therefore, it is quite important to bear this in mind. If you are on a proton pump inhibitor, it makes sense to try and work out whether, is there anything you can do to get you rid of your reflux without having to resort to the proton pump inhibitor. Usually it involves improving your diet and losing weight. If you can do that, then generally the reflux tends to get a little bit better. If you can come off the proton pump inhibitors, then I'm sure that is a good thing. We know that proton pump inhibitors reduce magnesium absorption, and as I've found from a lot of people, they've taken some magnesium and they've felt a lot better, and their palpitations have become less frequent. Their ectopics have become less frequent. So it's worth bearing in mind that these are things that we've done to ourselves. We're eating the wrong food, we're leading bad lifestyles, and we are therefore having to compensate by taking medications which then interfere with other natural processes in our body, and by doing so, one thing compounds the other, and you develop these deficiencies, and they then translate into symptoms like palpitations. So and this is for you, Monica Garrison. As I said, I hope you found this useful. Just to finally to say, my name is Sanjay Gupta, and I am also now available on Facebook. And my Facebook page is Your Cardiology, and I'm also available on Twitter. And finally, if you want to get in touch with me, you can do so through my website. I am getting a lot of questions online at the moment, and it's difficult. I'm finding it really difficult to keep up with with answering everyone's queries. So if you have any questions, please send them to my website and I'll try and answer them. Even better, you can contact my secretary on 01904725811, and she can always organize a telephone consultation, which would be my preferred way to try and answer queries, because trying to answer things over the internet without knowing people is quite difficult. So I wish you all a good night, and I hope you found this useful. Thanks. Bye.